Mike Tyson, the youngest heavyweight boxing champion in history, was a force of nature. In the ring, his knockout punches were the stuff of nightmares and made him a legend. But his violent tendencies extended way beyond the ring. According to Mike himself, his best punch that he ever threw in his entire life wasn't in the ring in front of a million adoring fans, but it was behind closed doors at his wife, Robin Givens. In the 80s, Mike and Robin were America's it couple. She was a model and an actress, fallen headfirst into a whirlwind romance with the boxer. But soon, rumours of Mike Tyson's unstable, explosive and violent behaviour began to surface. But the world refused to see the truth. Desperate to break free from this nightmare, Robin very bravely spoke out publicly against the abuse that she was suffering at the hands of Mike. She made a very public cry for help on TV, but instead of getting it, she was crucified. People were outraged. People were accusing her of humiliating Mike Tyson. They labelled her a gold digger. They said that she was fame hungry. People refused to believe that the same man they adored in the ring was also beating his wife behind closed doors. But if Mike wasn't the champion, would the world have dared to see the truth? So thank God it's Freaky Friday, because today Jake Paul isn't the only one facing off with Mike Tyson. His past has a bigger score to settle. While the world watches Mike return to the ring, we are exposing his abusive, misogynistic patterns that have ruined the lives of multiple women, and he has never taken accountability for. This series is intended for educational purposes, to document mysteries, historical events, and amplify important conversations. All opinions stated are mine alone. Before we get into this episode of Freaky Friday, I want to give a shout out to our sponsor, Skillshare, for making this video possible. As you should know by now, I am a Skillshare girly through and through. I'm always looking for new classes to start, and recently I've been stepping up my Notion game. If you don't know what Notion is, you need to get to know. Seriously, this is a must-have for all bosses of all genders. It's a platform that you can use to help you organize both your business and your personal life. I have been using Notion for years. Literally all of the researching, the writing and the editing for today's video was all organized using Notion. And thanks to Skillshare, I've been using Ali Abdaal's Notion masterclass called Maximize Your Productivity and Organization to elevate my Notion skills. I'm sure a lot of you know who Ali Abdaal is. He is a very, very successful productivity YouTuber. I love his content. So when I saw that he was doing Skillshare classes, you know I was clicking. And his masterclass on Notion was so easy to follow. Whether you are brand new, he can get you freshly acquainted, or if you're kind of experienced at Notion, then he can help improve those skills. Ali teaches you everything from planning your schedule to achieving your goals using Notion, all the way through to running the internal workings of a business using this website. Skillshare is the biggest online learning community with thousands of classes taught by industry experts on a range of different topics, from illustration and design and photography to cooking. Any skill or hobby you might have or might want to get into, I can almost guarantee you there is a Skillshare class on it. Their lessons are uniquely curated to help you master your chosen craft. Every class that they have, every learning path that they have is so easy to use, easy to navigate. I adore it. I'm always looking for ways to keep learning as an adult that is out of education now. I feel like life can get very repetitive if you're not learning new things. So, if you want to be like me and level up some of your skills or hobbies, Skillshare has a gift for you. The first 500 people to sign up to Skillshare using my link, which is down below in the description of this video, will enjoy a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. After all, it is autumn. It is the start of a new academic year, so even if you're like me and you haven't been in school for years and years and years, maybe it's time to learn a thing or two. Thanks again to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. Now, before we get into this case, I just want to warn you, we're going to be covering a lot of sensitive topics in this one, including discussions of domestic violence, sexual assault, rape, miscarriage, victim blaming, racism, bullying, and harassment. And I want to bring extra attention to the fact that this case is very heavy with violence against women in varying degrees. We're going to be going through these cases in quite a bit of detail, and while I think it's very important to share these stories, your well-being comes first. So if you need to step away from this episode and prioritize yourself, please do. And I hope I can see you another time with a different video. But with all that being said, let's dive into how Robin Givens survived Mike Tyson's violent abuse for years, only to become one of the most hated women in America. On February 11th, 1990, Mike Tyson, the undefeated and unstoppable champion, was in Tokyo to fight James Buster Douglas. On paper, Buster Douglas was barely even a threat to Mike Tyson. Everyone thought that Mike was going to win this fight so easy. But when the bell rang, what unfolded was one of the most shocking defeats in boxing history. Mike Tyson was knocked out, and as he stumbled back to his corner, his face all swollen and bruised, he realized just how unprepared he had been for this fight. He was only 23 years old at this point, but up until now, he had been a practically unstoppable force. He was like a human wrecking ball in the ring. He could take on any opponent, and with every fight that he won, Mike Tyson only grew in power and money. But that night, Mike got a taste of his own medicine, a devastating knockout punch. The world couldn't believe it. Mike Tyson had lost. And he received a lot of criticism for this fight, mainly for how unprepared he was. And on the topic, Mike himself said, "Besides having sex with the maids, I was seeing this young Japanese girl who I had sex with the last time I was in Japan. Robin would go out shopping and I would go downstairs to the back of the hotel where this young girl had a room. So that was my training for Douglas." Just let that sink in for a second. Mike Tyson was trying to blame his loss in the ring on the fact that he had had too much sex and he just couldn't cut back on it in order to find time to train. Mike himself admitted that he was obsessed with women. He felt like he had to conquer them. And that is a direct quote. We'll get more into that later. He felt like conquering women made him a great man. It made him an alpha male. It was all part of showing his power, both in and out of the ring. Mike wasn't secretive about how he abused his ex-wife, Robin Givens. In his book, he proudly recalled the time he beat her at a friend's apartment, saying, "That was the best punch I've ever thrown in my entire life." One time, he literally said on Oprah that he wanted to sock Robin, and the audience laughed.
I truly wanted to sock her. At that particular moment, I truly wanted to sock her.
They laughed, as if the image of one of the strongest men in the whole entire world hitting a woman is hilarious. It's actually terrifying how easily his words were brushed off and how his violence was treated like a punchline. But he wasn't joking. He genuinely did used to sock Robin.
Did you sock her afterwards?
No, not afterwards. I didn't sock her. I wanted to sock her. I have socked her before.
And Robin Givens has lived in the shadows of his punches for decades. She's been told by the world that her pain doesn't matter, that it's no big deal. But that can't be the truth anymore, because it was a big deal and it continues to be a big deal. Her side of the story deserves to be told. And she is far more than just a shocking headline in Mike Tyson's story. Robin Simone Givens was born on November 27th, 1964 in New York City to parents Ruth and Reuben. Her mum and dad's relationship was seriously violent. Her mother had tried to leave her father once before but ended up coming back, and very soon after she came back to him, she fell pregnant with Robin's little sister. So her mother, Ruth, stayed with this awful man. She endured his affairs, his brutality, the whole time she was pregnant and trying to nurse their 1-year-old, and he was awful to her. Robin's first ever memory was of her father beating her mother, and that is just so heartbreaking. This little girl, this 1-year-old, 2-year-old girl would often lay witness to her father's brutality, and soon Robin herself would get tragically swept up in her father's behaviour. One time, her father had a bunch of his friends round, and Ruth had actually left baby Robin with her father and his friends while she went to run her a bath. But when she came back, she was horrified. In the time that she had been gone, her husband's friends had propped baby Robin up against the coffee table and handed her one of their cans of beer, and she was chugging it away. Her father supposedly had no idea that any of this was going on, that his friends were doing this to his daughter. He was just watching TV. But when he found out, he went crazy. He flew over, he knocked the can of beer out of baby Robin's hand, and he smacked her. As if this 1-year-old had actively made the choice to sit down and drink a beer. She doesn't even understand what that means, but she is the one that is being punished for this. Her mother, Ruth, was devastated. She ran over, she scooped up her daughter from the floor, and she looked her husband dead in the eyes and reprimanded him in front of all of his friends. This was something she never did, something she knew that she would pay for later. But in that moment, nothing mattered except protecting her baby. That night, as Ruth held her pregnant belly and looked into the mirror at her freshly bruised eye, she made herself a promise. She was getting herself and her kids the hell out of there. And so she ran away. She ran away from her husband and she took Robin with her. She was still pregnant at this point. She was just determined to give her daughters a better life, even if she had to work twice, 3 times as hard to be able to provide for them all on her own. She would do it. Robin Givens always felt supported by her mother in her childhood and by her Catholic faith and by her school, who noticed very early on that Robin Givens was a child genius. Well, maybe that's a little bit dramatic, but she was so advanced for her age. She managed to skip like 3 grades in primary school. She was very academically gifted, but that wasn't exactly her passion in school. She loved drama. Her drama classes were her favourite of all of the ones that she took, and she would tell her mum that she wanted to pursue this. She wanted a job doing acting or performing, and her mum was disappointed to hear this, actually. She had always hoped that Robin would become a doctor. Her mother saw drama and acting kind of just like a distraction from what her true path should be, and that's a career in medicine. But Robin's drama teacher recognised something very special in her, and Robin never let go of that belief in herself. Even though Robin was happy and she was doing well at school as a child, she couldn't quite shake the feeling that something, or rather someone, was missing. She saw all of their friends with their fathers, and she wished that she still had contact with her own. So one day, she worked up the courage to go and tell her mum that she and her younger sister, who had been born at this point, her name was Stephanie, but Robin and Stephanie wanted to meet their father. At first, their mother was devastated to hear this because, of course, she had been abused so badly by that man. He wasn't a good man, and as much as she didn't want her daughters to meet him, she knew that this was really important to them. They needed to meet this man. So, in the summer of 1974, when Robin was only 10 years old and her younger sister was 8, Ruth let the 2 of them fly from New York City on their own to Kentucky, where their father lived. But this Kentucky trip would soon turn into a nightmare, one that would haunt Robin's relationships with men for the rest of her life. So the 2 young girls, like I said, flew by themselves, which feels like an entirely different world to the one that we live in right now, but that used to be so much more common in the 80s and 90s. Wait, this was in 74 as well, so yeah, 10-year-olds and 8-year-olds flying by themselves was way more common back then than it is today. You never see that today. Is it even legal today? Do they need to be 16 to fly on their own? I don't know. But these 2 little kids fly, it's only an internal flight in America, isn't it? But they get off in Kentucky, and they're met at the airport by their granddad, who is actually Ruth's father. It's a maternal granddad, so it's nothing to do with their dad. And this granddad sounds like such an angel. He picked them up at the airport, and they felt so much love from this man. It felt like instant family. There was just so much love and kindness and happiness, and the girls at this point were so glad that they had asked to do this trip because meeting this grandfather was so rewarding. He then took the girls to their father's house, and Robin was expecting the same reaction there. You know, she was going to walk through the door, he was going to run up to her and scoop her up and cuddle her, but as soon as he opened the front door and just stared down at those two girls, Robin knew that wasn't going to happen. He wasn't warm, he wasn't cuddly, he wasn't really excited to see them. He welcomed them into his apartment that was nothing like either of them had ever imagined. It felt cold and bare, like it belonged to a stranger. There was barely any furniture, it wasn't homely. There was just this one lonely sofa in the living room, and sitting on it was a woman, or a girl, not that much older than Robin herself. Turns out this is her dad's new girlfriend. And we don't know exactly how old she was. Trust me, we've tried to find this out. But all we know is what Robin has said in her book, and that was that she wasn't much older than me. Which is a scary thought, because she was 10. And to make things even weirder, guess what her name was? Her name was Robin. He was dating a young girl with the same name as his daughter. Ugh. But anyway, their father showed Robin and Stephanie to the room that they would be staying in. It was a completely empty room. There were no beds in it, just 2 sleeping bags laid out on the floor. But you know what? They just took it as it was, because they were finally meeting their father. So they go to sleep in these sleeping bags and they wake up the next day really excited to spend the day with this man who they had flown all the way here to bond with. But when they got out of the sleeping bags and went into the rest of the house, their dad was nowhere to be found. He had gone out to play basketball with his friends. And he had left his 2 daughters that he hadn't seen in like 9 years. He left them with his girlfriend in the house. I just want you to bear in mind that he's never even met Stephanie before. The last time he saw her, she was just a bump in her mum's tummy. You would think that he would want to meet these girls and spend time with them and learn about them, but no, it seems like he's just trying to get away from them. Later that same day, the girls' grandfather, do you remember? Fun grandfather. He came to pick them up from their dad's, and he took them to his house where they had a bunch more like extended family round. They got to meet so many people, they had food, they had such a great time again with their granddad. It was a completely different vibe to their dad's house. And so when the next day came round, the day that they were supposed to be going back to their dad's, they tried everything that they could to stay at granddad's. At one point, they even barricaded the door of their granddad's house with a sofa. I don't think there were any adults around when they did this. Apparently, she had some younger aunties that were kind of around her age, so a bunch of teenage girls pushing a sofa in front of a door so that Robin and Stephanie's father couldn't get in to take them home. Robin was angry at her father on this day. She yelled at him when he came to pick her up, saying, "You have not been around for 10 years and now you want to tell me what to do? Mum said we could stay, so we're staying." Yeah, that's one thing. They actually called their mum up in New York and said, "Can we stay at Granddad's house in Kentucky? Because Dad wants to take us to his." And she was like, yeah, stay at your granddad's. But her dad was having none of this. And as soon as she started yelling at him and asking him these questions that he didn't have the answers to, like, "You've not been around for 10 years and now you think you can tell me what to do," he was fuming. And so he just burst through the door, grabbed Robin. He threw her over his shoulder and just carried her out to the car. She was kicking and screaming, but he didn't let her go. When they got back to his house, to his very empty apartment, he threw Robin in that bedroom that just had 2 sleeping bags in it, and he removed his belt, preparing to beat her. And in that moment, like some kind of superhero, her granddad bursts through the door of her father's apartment and comes and rescues both Robin and Stephanie. The very next morning, their granddad put the 2 girls on a flight back home to New York, and the whole journey, Robin felt awful. She felt so guilty because she felt like all of this was her fault. And she carried that overwhelming guilt and shame through her whole entire life. Even though she was only 10 years old, literally none of this was her fault. Her father was just a dick. And it's just so heartbreaking to me to think that she kept replaying the events of that trip over and over in her head, trying to figure out what she could have done differently, how she could have avoided her father's anger. But those aren't thoughts that a child should ever have to have. The blame didn't belong to her at all. It belonged to the man that was supposed to be her father, but he was too cruel to care. After that awful trip to Kentucky, Robin didn't see her father again for years, and she gave up all hope of having a relationship with him. Instead, she poured all of her energy into herself, and when she was just 15 years old, she became a pre-med student, much to the delight of her mother that she was taking this medical career that she had so wanted her to. And I don't think we've actually acknowledged this yet, but Robin Givens was effortlessly stunning. Such a beautiful girl. Like one of those classic 90s models with almond eyes, high cheekbones, just super striking features. So as a teenager, she would get these little modeling jobs and small acting jobs that fed her craving for creativity and performance that she had had since a kid doing those drama classes. I mean, she is still a kid at this point, probably mid-teens. She graduated her pre-med course at the age of 19, and then she applied for Harvard. And this was mainly just to keep her mum happy, because really, at this point, Robin knew that all she wanted to do was acting. She didn't want a medical career, an academic career. She wanted to perform, but you know, her mum was never going to let her just drop all of her academics to pursue acting. So Robin continued to juggle her auditions and acting classes, and then eventually she got a call to audition for The Cosby Show. It was the #1 show on TV at the time, and Robin got the part. She was over the moon. She felt like this was the first big step in her acting career. There was only one problem though. She had to now try and tell her mother that she was going to pursue acting. And I can't imagine it went down well. While Robin was on The Cosby Show, she got really close to Bill Cosby. And he basically took her under his wing as a mentor in the industry. He actually believed in Robin as an actress so much that Bill Cosby himself went and met up with her disapproving mother, Ruth, so that he could try to persuade her that Robin was meant for acting. And you know what? All of this from Bill Cosby seems very genuine and nice. There's nothing unusual about offering to mentor someone. But knowing what we know about Cosby now, the soft spot that he seemed to have for Robin Givens is concerning. Bill Cosby has been accused by over 60 women of rape, drug-facilitated sexual abuse, sexual battery, child SA, and sexual harassment. So, like I said, the idea of him taking a special interest in a young woman like Robin, she was 20 years old at this point in time, it just feels very disturbing and creepy, to say the very least. Robin herself has publicly said, I think a couple of different times, that Bill Cosby never did anything to her. She wasn't one of his victims as far as she is concerned. He never did anything weird, never assaulted her, was never sexual with her. She insists, and so I believe her. But even if Robin Givens wasn't one of Bill Cosby's many victims, he is still one of the most sinister figures in Hollywood. At the time when Robin got that role to be on The Cosby Show, I bet she was over the moon. It seemed like a golden opportunity. But now it just feels tainted by the disgusting intentions we know were probably lurking beneath the surface. Because Robin Givens was exactly the type of woman that Bill Cosby would target. They were young actresses who he would offer to help and offer to mentor, and then he would take advantage. The #MeToo movement has brought many of these stories to light and has helped to give justice to some of the women that he so brutally assaulted, but there is a long way to go. The whole Bill Cosby thing is so eerie, it makes me shudder to think about it. Me and the whole team have been talking about him, obviously, while researching this case. If you guys want to see a deep dive on it, do let us know in the comments. But even though Robin Givens claims she wasn't one of Bill Cosby's victims, she would soon become the target of another man's abuse. And this man had somehow managed to dodge the full impact of the #MeToo movement, despite being charged with rape and openly admitting to horrific acts of violence against women. His abuse has largely flown under the radar. And that man is Mike Tyson. He is known as the youngest heavyweight champion of the world, but his legacy of violence goes way beyond the ring. In 1986, Mike Tyson first saw Robin Givens on TV. where she worked. And he was immediately besotted by her. He thought this was one of the most beautiful women he had ever seen, and he needed to know her. But this was the 80s, so it wasn't really as easy as like sliding into her Instagram DMs or whatever. He had to like try and track her down. And Mike Tyson is the kind of guy that when he wants something, he is gonna make sure he gets it. So he begins calling round everyone he knew in Hollywood, asking around if anyone knew this girl. And eventually, through a friend of a friend of a friend, he managed to get her number. Well, her landline number, the number of her house. This is important because when he called her up, her mum answered. It was Ruth on the phone, which is just, it's such a different world to what we live in right now. I only just grew up outside of landline territory, but I remember my sister having to like call her boyfriend on the landline, and like his mum would pick up and she'd be like, "Can I talk to my boyfriend?" Bit awkward, isn't it? But Mike left a message with Ruth that he was interested in her daughter and he wanted her to call him back. But Ruth wasn't best pleased with this boxer that had just turned up on their phone line. Ruth had very high standards for her daughter, as we already know, and she had those exact same high standards for her daughter's partner. She wanted him to be sophisticated, well-educated, have a very high-paying, high-respectable job, not a boxer. Not that I don't think boxing is a respectable job, I do, but the point is, Mike Tyson didn't exactly tick all of the boxes that Ruth had wanted for her daughter's partner. But at this point in time, Robin Givens was so over her mum trying to control every little detail of her life, like what job she should get, what university she should go to. And actually, Robin was kind of flattered by this phone call from Mike, that this boxer had gone through all of this effort, all of this trouble, calling through everyone he knew in Hollywood, just so that he could take her out on a date. It made her feel so special. So Robin agrees to go out with Mike for a date, but they would actually have to wait a bit. This date ended up getting postponed because Mike was busy becoming the youngest heavyweight boxing champion of the world. That happened in November 1986, and I guess if you're gonna postpone a date for anything, I feel like that's a solid reason. So it wasn't until January of 1987 that the two of them actually managed to meet up. Mike flew out to LA to take Robin out, and when he arrived, much to his surprise, Robin had brought her family on the date. Her little sister and her mother. Robin was really nervous about meeting up with Mike, so she'd actually invited her sister to kind of break the ice. Her and her sister were really close in age, so it didn't feel that weird. You know, a lot of people do bring someone on a first meetup. What makes less sense, however, is the fact that her mother is there on this first date. Could you imagine? Robin says that she still doesn't know how her mum even ended up coming along on that date. She doesn't remember inviting her, but I think Ruth just kind of assumed that she would be coming, and Robin didn't have the heart to tell her no. So instead of sorting that out, she just brought her along. And Mike actually ended up being an hour late to this date, which is bad for any date, but especially one where you're making her mama wait. So he strolls in this establishment an hour later, and when he did, the whole energy of the room changed. Apparently, when Mike Tyson walks in a room, everyone feels his presence. Robin described him as having this magnetic pull. She said it was some aura of power and danger and magnetism. And on this date, Mike Tyson was very charming and sweet and funny. He had everyone at the table laughing. Even Ruth was briefly infected by his charms. Not for too long, but a little bit. Robin and Mike got to know each other, and they acknowledged a lot of similarities. I mean, they both grew up in New York, they both had a sister, they both didn't really know their fathers, but honestly, that's about where the similarities ended, because Mike's upbringing was very different to Robin's. Michael Gerard Tyson was born on June 30th, 1966. He grew up in Brownsville, Brooklyn. This is supposedly a very tough neighborhood. It's kill or be killed. At school, Mike Tyson was actually quite severely bullied. The kids would steal his glasses and laugh at him and humiliate him. And there was this one time, so this is actually really heartbreaking. Little Mike Tyson used to keep pet pigeons. He would catch them and he would look after them, whatever. And one day he had one at school and these bullies stole his pigeon off him. As if that wasn't bad enough, they then snapped its neck in front of Mike. And in that moment, it was as if something inside Mike snapped along with it. He lunged at these boys, at these bullies, unleashing all of the anger and frustration that he had been holding in. And that was Mike Tyson's first ever fight. And he won.
When did you learn you could hit back?
I had some birds, and some guy just ripped the neck off my bird. I don't know why, he just put it in my face. Second day I started fighting.
How old were you?
I was perhaps 9 years old.
Did you knock him out?
Well, I beat the guy up. I didn't do any real damage, anything.
And from that moment on, Mike knew the kind of man that he had to be able to survive. He became much more assertive, much more aggressive, not because he wanted to necessarily, but because he was terrified of being humiliated or picked on again. And when he was around 8 years old, Mike started to hang out with the wrong crowds. And when I say wrong, I mean like the worst crowd he possibly could have found himself in. He was hanging out with older kids who were like 13 and 14, but Mike was actually already physically bigger than a lot of these kids, so they let him in the group. And these kids that he was friends with were absolutely rotten work. They would break into houses, they would rob people at gunpoint, they would grab anything they could, jewelry, money, radios, it didn't matter. And this is an 8-year-old, not only exposed to all of this, but encouraged to take part. By the time Mike was just 11 years old, he had supposedly tried most drugs, including cocaine. At 11, and by the time he was 13, he had been arrested 30 times. Around this time, because he was proving to be such a nuisance, Mike was sent to Tryon School for Boys in upstate New York. It was basically like a detention center for reforming troubled kids. And we've covered these sort of facilities on this channel before. They are the thing of nightmares. They can be so abusive, especially back then in the 70s. Oh, I don't even want to try and imagine. Tryon School for Boys was like a living hell. That school has a history of abuse where kids will get restrained so violently by the staff that they end up with concussions, broken bones, even shattered teeth. The juvenile system in America is so broken, especially for black boys. Once you get caught up in the system, there's practically no way out. The odds were stacked against Mike from the very beginning, but somehow he managed to find a way out. He started boxing while he was still in juvie, and it kind of became like his lifeline. The more he boxed, the better things seemed to get for him. His life improved, his grades were going up again. But just as things were starting to turn around, in September 1980, Mike's parole came through. He was going to be sent back home. He was going to be sent back to Brooklyn, to the same dangerous streets that he was trying to escape, the same streets and the same groups that had got him into this situation in the first place. His boxing coach in juvie knew that Mike Tyson going back to Brooklyn was a recipe for disaster. He'd either end up right back in Tryon School for Boys, or even worse. He could be killed, he could become a killer. This boxing coach was worried for him. He was worried for what life lied ahead of Mike Tyson if he wasn't helped at this young age. And so he told Mike, when he gets out of here, he should go and find a man named Cus D'Amato. And meeting this man would change Mike's life forever. Cus D'Amato became Mike Tyson's boxing coach. And he became actually way more than that. He became the father that Mike had always needed but never had. Mike had only known hardship and violence and abandonment. But in Cus's home, he found structure, care, and most importantly, discipline. Cus actually ended up adopting Mike Tyson when Mike was about 16, 17 years old. His mother had just passed away from cancer, so without Cus, Mike would have had no one. And now, for the first time, Mike had someone that really, truly believed in him unconditionally. He won fight after fight after fight being trained by Cus D'Amato, and together, they took over the boxing world. So we're not going to go into detail about Mike's boxing career in this episode. You can probably find that on another channel. Today, we're more focusing on his personal life and specifically his life with Robin Givens. In 1987, Mike was just 20 years old when he first met Robin Givens in LA for their first date that had become an unexpected dinner for four. At this point in his life, Mike was feeling very lost because it actually hadn't been that long since he lost Customata. He passed away just 2 years into their friendship, their relationship, their adoptionship. He passed in 1985, which is 2 years before he met Robin. So even though he was mostly over the death itself at this point, he was not over the loss, the Customato-shaped hole in his life. For the past 2 years since losing D'Amato, Mike had felt like his whole world ended. He felt vulnerable, incredibly lonely. He was scared. And so he started to lock himself away in his bedroom or in hotel rooms for hours at a time. He was just watching videos on the internet of other boxing greats. He became actually quite obsessed with doing this, like watching them and watching their techniques and what he would have done differently. Mike Tyson absolutely idolized the men that came before him in the boxing world. And not only did he want to model himself after these men in the ring, he wanted to model his whole entire life and personality around these men because he thought that they were great men. Something he always aspired to be was a great man, just like them. So he believed that in order for him to be just as great as them, he needed to do everything that they did, including having power over women. He believed this toxic idea that the most women you conquer, the greater figure you may be. And this mindset is beyond disgusting. He is dehumanizing women and treating them like they're animals in his path, like they're something to hunt, use, and discard whenever he wants. It's a reflection of a toxic, misogynistic culture that reduces women to trophies rather than seeing them as equal human beings. And let's just be absolutely clear that this isn't just harmful language. It's a form of violence. When men see women as nothing more than just objects to conquer, they're entering relationships with them as if it's some sort of battle. 19-year-old Mike Tyson was creating a very dangerous metaphor in his head that women were something to conquer. He was comparing his relationships, romantic relationships, to stepping in the boxing ring. And that is truly frightening. And it wasn't long before Robin Givens would find herself on the receiving end of his sick, twisted, misogynistic mindset. After their date in January 1987, things moved really quickly between them. Robin's life turned into a total whirlwind. The two of them were always back and forth, flying to see each other. They would talk on the phone all the time, for hours through the night, no matter what time it was. It was that kind of like wild young love where you just can't get enough of each other. It completely sweeps you off your feet, only to drop you even harder on the ground. But Robin's mother, Ruth, had seen all of the red flags in Mike Tyson from day one. Maybe not all of them, but she had noticed that this man, there was something not quite right about him. Ruth could see through Mike's surface level charm. She picked up on some toxic traits that actually really worried her. Mike was very demanding of Robin's time and attention, and Ruth noticed that he was becoming controlling. She even saw changes in her own daughter's behavior. She would stay out all night partying with him when she had something to do the next morning, and that was totally out of character for Robin. She'd never been like a crazy party girl. Her career always came first, but now Mike was changing her in every single way. Ruth would warn her daughter Robin that Mike's love for her was just poison wrapped up in sweetness. So convincing that you'd swear it's real. And the truth was, it felt a lot like deja vu for Ruth. Their relationship reminded her way too much of her own relationship with Robin's father, the one that she had desperately tried to escape. She feared that she was watching her daughter in the early stages of that kind of relationship. Around this time, Robin moved back to New York with her mum, which is actually where I believe Mike was,
And Robin was acting differently. Like I said, she was going out until like 4 or 5 a.m. She was coming back blasted. She would get in a lot of arguments and a lot of fights with her mum about Mike, and she would be desperately trying to defend him and all of his actions. Mike was really driving a wedge between this mother-daughter relationship, and Ruth couldn't stand to see her daughter go down this path. She knew she needed to do something big to wake her daughter up. And so one night, when Ruth just couldn't take it anymore, while Robin was out at a party, she packed a suitcase and left it outside the front door for her. She locked the door. Her daughter was not coming home. If she wanted to be with Mike so bad, then maybe she could just go and live with him. So, later that night, or in the early hours of the morning, Robin and Mike go back to her apartment when they find the door is locked and there's a suitcase of all Robin's stuff outside. She had been kicked out of her family home. And while Robin was shocked and actually quite devastated that her mum had taken such drastic action. I mean, she had been warned, but she didn't think that her mum would actually do something like this. Robin was actually quite heartbroken over this. This felt like a very big statement from her mum, something that Robin wanted to fix. But Mike, on the other hand, was over the moon. He was delighted. He swept Robin up in his arms and laughed, saying that she had no choice now but to come and live with him and to be with him forever. But that's not really what Robin wanted right now. She wanted to fix her relationship with her mum. None of this felt right. It all felt very sudden, and she started to feel very claustrophobic. Her mind was racing, and she was just telling Mike that she needed some space. She needed space and time to think about a decision like this because it was big. But Mike wasn't really listening to her. He was doing that thing, that men do where they're like, oh, whatever, of course she's saying that. And so she physically pulled herself away from him. And that was when he could see that she was serious. And so this big argument burst out between the two of them. Robin is desperately trying to defend her right to sit and think about a big decision like this, but Mike doesn't want to hear it. And then his face darkened with anger. Robin could just tell that something had snapped inside of him. Mike grabbed Robin in one arm and her suitcase in the other and began to drag her down the stairs. Robin was struggling and yelling at him to just let her go. She was hitting on him, but his grip only tightened. By the time they got back out to Mike's car, Robin was full on panicking at this point in time. She was screaming at him again that she needed space and she wasn't going to come with him. But this only fueled Mike's anger that Robin was disagreeing with him. He wanted Robin to come and live with him, and that would be final. As it always is with Mike, whatever he wants, he gets. And so he locked her in the car and started to drive her away. This wasn't the first time that Mike had physically overpowered Robin, and there wasn't anything playful or gentle about it. This time it felt dangerous. He had essentially just kidnapped her, shoved her in a car and driven her away. Once they reached Mike's apartment, Robin actually refused to get out of the car because this isn't what she wanted. She was holding on to her car seat with everything that she had. He was trying to drag her out and she just kept saying, no, no, no. Mike's patience was running thin until he eventually grabbed her by the ankles and yanked her out of the car hard. Before she even knew what happened, she smacked the ground outside the car and pain shot through her whole entire body. She sat there. She felt humiliated. She was hurt, and she was so scared of this man who claimed to love her. Mike didn't bother to see if she was all right. He just pulled her up again off the ground and dragged her inside. And as soon as the door closed behind them, Robin felt completely alone. She forced herself to stay calm and tried to tell him again, softly, Mike, listen to me. Please listen to me. I have to go. But before she could say another word, Mike suddenly turned and his massive fist, the same fist that had knocked out so many men in the ring, slammed into the side of Robin's head. She collapsed to the ground, barely conscious from the blow, and when she came round, Mike was standing over her, his face empty, calm, almost serene. Neither of them spoke as Robin picked herself up off the ground and stumbled out of the apartment. Mike has spoken about an incident a lot like this in his biography where he said, It was when I fought Robin in Steve Lott's apartment. She really offended me and I went BAM! She flew backwards, hitting every wall in the apartment. That was the best punch I've ever thrown in my entire life. And let that just sink in. Mike Tyson, the heavyweight boxing champion of the world, trained to knock the hell out of his opponents. The best punch he proudly claims he ever threw in his entire life was against the woman that he claimed to love. And Mike Tyson's boxing technique actually involves him envisioning his fist, his punch, going directly through the back of his opponent's head, his fist going in and out of their skull. Was that what he was imagining the night that he hit Robin Givens? The same brutal intent, the same cold precision? Any act of domestic violence is always horrific, but to be hit by a man who trains every day to inflict maximum damage on professional fighters, it's beyond terrifying. It's monstrous. After this particular incident, like I said, Robin got up silently and left his apartment. She didn't want anything to do with Mike now. And he desperately, for a while after this incident, was groveling, trying to get Robin back. He told her he felt terrible and he just couldn't think straight after what he'd done, and he just loved her so much. And it was working, you know? Robin loved him too, and she thought that maybe if she could just show him how much she loved him, then maybe it would never happen again, just as he promised. She thought that she could fix him. But remember, it is never the victim's job to help or to fix their abuser. That's for psychiatrists. All that should be left for a victim to do is get the hell out of there and heal. It's heartbreaking to think that she wanted him to be okay so much, more than she wanted that for herself. In the end, Robin forgave him, and the two of them stayed together. But as much as she wanted to put all of that behind them and move on, that night was actually just the beginning. What came next was a toxic love story that was far more violent than she could have ever imagined. On February 7th, 1988, just 11 months after their first date, Robin Givens and Mike Tyson get married. He was only 21 years old, she was 23. The two of them had spent the day watching a basketball game in Chicago, and then Mike took Robin to a church, all alone, just the two of them. He had planned a surprise wedding with no attendees. I would be fuming. I'm sure he thought he was doing something romantic, but if I'm getting married and my mum and my sister out there, I'm not getting married. But as much of a surprise as it was, Robin Givens was now married to Mike Tyson. And very quickly after, she found out that she was pregnant with his baby. Now, at this point, Mike wasn't doing very good mental health-wise. He was more erratic and unpredictable than he had been in a long time. He would have these flashes of being really kind and sweet and gentle with Robin, but they would disappear just as quickly as they came. Robin just remembers feeling so numb and overwhelmed by all of the chaos, by all of the ups and downs, until the day that she discovered Mike Tyson's multiple affairs. It was 3 months after their wedding. Robin and Mike were in their apartment in New York when Robin walked over to give him a hug. She innocently slipped her hand in his pocket whilst giving him a hug and felt a handful of condoms. Robin's heart sank, knowing that these must have been intended for use with another woman. And up until this point, she had only just been holding it all together. But in this moment, this discovery, it just made her snap. Blinded by rage, Robin grabbed the keys to Mike's 90 grand Bentley and she ran out of the apartment, crying hysterically. She got behind the wheel of the car, and her mum actually ran out and jumped into the back of the car behind her to try to calm her daughter down and make sure that she was okay. And then, as she was doing that, Mike jumps in the car too. He's now in the passenger seat, and he's smirking. He's laughing at this situation. It only makes Robin a million times more angry that he doesn't care. Suddenly, Robin just begins driving. She's just driving this Bentley around. She doesn't know where she's going. She doesn't have a plan. It's all just happening. And then she turned into a car park in Manhattan and slammed this Bentley, this very expensive car, she just slammed it into the back of a parked car. She didn't think that anyone was inside of the car that she had just rammed into, but there was. As soon as they'd done it, as they just kind of sat there getting their breath back, the front door of that car swung open and someone jumped out of it. Thankfully, he was completely unharmed, just very shaken up and confused. In that moment, Mike Tyson, to the rescue, jumps out of the Bentley and just hands this guy a wad of cash. Just apologizes and says, that'll cover it. When the police arrived, Mike actually took all of the blame for this incident. He said that he'd just been having car trouble. And as they were leaving the scene of the crime, Mike actually tossed his Bentley keys to one of the officers and said, just keep it. A 90 grand Bentley. Imagine getting a dent in your car and going, I'll just get a new one. This Bentley story is actually quite famous. It's always been the media's favorite story to tell about Mike Tyson. Even Joe Rogan couldn't resist asking him about it recently.
So why don't you just take it? You know, it was around 230 at the time. So why don't you just take it? It'd be okay. And the guy said, hey, don't tell me that. And then once he said that, I said, got him.
But what everyone conveniently leaves out of this Bentley story is the fact that it all began because Mike was cheating on his wife. His pregnant wife. And Mike didn't even stop his affairs after that. All of this happened because he was a cheating scumbag and he just didn't change. He even had the nerve to call his cheating his extracurricular activities. A month after the Bentley incident, Robin Givens tragically suffered a miscarriage. And Mike was right there with her, holding her hand in the doctor's office as they received that devastating news. Robin remembers just desperately trying to understand what she could have done to deserve the pain of losing an unborn baby. So many women, just like Robin, experience this heartbreaking cycle of self-blame and wondering what they did wrong, if they did anything wrong, if they could have done something differently. But miscarriage is not any woman's fault. Miscarriages are devastating and they are unfair, so unfair, and they're never something that you should blame yourself for. It's okay to grieve, it's okay to feel sad and angry, whatever emotions come up, but just know that you are not alone and you didn't do anything wrong. Mike stood with Robin in that hotel room through every painful moment, and Robin really truly felt his love and kindness so strongly. It was perhaps the last truly loving moment that the couple ever shared. In September 1988, Robin and Mike were in Moscow because Robin was filming a TV show out there, so they'd been there together this whole time, and on their very last night in the country, they were out having some drinks on an American army base. To me, that feels random, but maybe it's actually not. Maybe there's an explanation for why they were on an army base, but either way, they were drinking, they were having a night out, essentially, but they had a very early flight the next morning. So Robin was the sensible one of the two, and she suggested that maybe they should head back to the hotel, maybe they should take it easy. But Mike didn't want to hear any of it. He didn't want to leave. And Robin knew that she wouldn't be able to convince him otherwise, especially when he's drunk. She was going to take herself to the hotel and get some sleep. But before she left, she pulled him aside and reminded him that he shouldn't really be drinking when he's on his new medication. Mike had been diagnosed as manic depressive, and he was dealing with some very, very severe mood swings, and apparently he was taking lithium at the time, which is known as a mood stabilizer, and drinking on that stuff is a really bad idea. But Mike didn't want to hear it. He thought his wife was just being a fuddy-duddy. So he lets her go back to the hotel room. He keeps drinking. Robin went back and she packed all their suitcases for the two of them. She got herself ready for bed. And at 4 a.m., once she'd finally fallen asleep, she was woken up to a bunch of loud banging in the hotel room. Mike had made his way home. Robin had gotten up out of bed to let Mike into the hotel room, and he was just stumbling about drunk, so she just turned the lights off and went back to bed, expecting that he would join her soon enough. But even in the darkness, she felt that something was terribly wrong. Suddenly, Mike climbed on top of her and began kissing her. And she wasn't in the mood for this. It was 4 a.m. They had an early flight the next morning. So she pushed him away, saying, stop. Every time he would come back and she would push him away and say, stop, but he would come back. But he would try again. He just kept trying. He wouldn't leave her alone. He wouldn't take no for an answer. He screamed at Robin, I am your husband. He also called her a bitch as well. At this point, his jealousy was going out of control. He was accusing Robin of waiting for another man to come to the hotel room and have sex with her that night. Like that even makes sense. He thought that she was planning to meet up with another man, but she doesn't even want anything to do with you right now. She's trying to sleep. Robin tried to tell him that this was all nonsense. She said, I don't want to do this right now. But as she said those words, Mike moved his hand between her legs. He grabbed her pajama top and ripped it open in one quick and vicious motion. Robin began to cry. She was absolutely terrified of her husband. And then Mike pinned her arms above her head and raped her. Robin wrote about this moment in her book, saying that she felt as if she was fighting for her life. Mike had violated her. The man who was supposed to love and care for her and protect her had become someone that she was desperately trying to get away from. But the overwhelming terror that Mike Tyson caused that night didn't even stop there. After he was finished, Mike got up and went to the bathroom. Robin was still crying. She tried to pull herself together as best as she could, and she just tried to go back to sleep and get some rest for that flight. But suddenly she hears all these banging and crashing sounds coming from the bathroom. Of course, Mike is still shit-faced drunk, so she has to go in there and see what's going on. But she can't open the bathroom door. Mike's locked himself in there. He was spiraling out of control inside that bathroom. The two of them were shouting through the door, and he was saying that he wanted to kill himself. He wanted to end his life that night. So Robin was panicking, and she called her mum, who was in Moscow with them. She was staying in that same hotel. She called her mum. She called her press aide, who was just someone that she was working with. She just needed anyone, someone else to come and help her. So these two women are awoken by Robin's calls in the middle of the night, and they rush over to their hotel room still in their pajamas. By this point, Robin had managed to get the bathroom door open. She made her way in there and wrestled a full bottle of pills out of Mike's hand. After everything that he had just done to her, absolutely violating her, she was distraught. She was broken. Yet in that moment, all she wanted to do was help Mike, save Mike. She didn't want him to hurt himself the way that he had just hurt her. Suddenly, Mike burst through the door and ran out of the hotel room completely. He was running down the hallway, trying to make it to the elevator. He actually jumped in. And so these three women, not wanting to hurt himself or hurt anyone else, they ran after him. They jumped into the elevator with him. Once they got down to the lobby, he grabbed hold of the press aide and literally dragged her out of the elevator. Robin was trying her best to get him off of the press aide, and he's trying to fight all of these women at once. He's like chasing them around the lobby individually. He eventually gets a hold of Robin and starts just throwing her around. He was like growling. He was muttering all these things that didn't make sense. It was disturbing, terrifying. As all of this was happening, Robin's mother, Ruth, managed to run back to the elevator and get the hell out of there. She ran back up to their room, and just as she did, she looked back and saw Mike grabbing the press aide, throwing her to the ground, and he began just kicking her, repeatedly laying into her. Robin was screaming, crying, trying to pull him off until he eventually backed away. When he was finished, when he had eventually gotten all of his anger out on these three women, Mike went back up to the hotel room. He just went back up to the 18th floor and kind of pretended as if nothing happened, while Robin was desperately trying to console her press aide, who was curled up in a bundle on the floor, sobbing. Eventually, the two of them went upstairs as well, back to their hotel rooms, and when they did, they heard Mike still awake and shouting. So they followed the sound because it wasn't actually coming from a hotel room. They didn't know where it was coming from. And as they got closer, they saw Mike hanging over the railings that faced out into the lobby. Remember, he is 18 floors high. So Robin freaked out. She runs over to him and starts grabbing his arm and trying to pull him up. She was holding on to him like she could somehow catch him if he fell. But really, if he was to have fallen, Robin would have been dragged down with him. Both of them would have fallen and hit the marble floor 18 floors below. She was screaming, sobbing, begging him to just stop, to just save himself. And finally, she managed to pull him back over the railing, and it was all over. Robin was still shaking with fear and anger. She was still sobbing, and she wrapped her arms around him and didn't let him go. The two of them stumbled back into their hotel room and went to sleep before that early flight. The chaos of that nightmare in Moscow had finally come to an end. After this trip, Mike was in a very, very bad place mentally. It seemed like that was just the start of it. Meanwhile, the press seemed to have caught on to the fact that Mike Tyson is unstable at this point. They'd actually started to report about the Moscow incident. Although I think the reporting about it back then was more basic, probably that Mike Tyson is drunk and unruly at a hotel in Moscow, you know? They don't know the dark shit that went on inside that hotel room right before. But the craziest part about this Moscow incident being all over the news was that the media and the public only really seemed to care about how this would affect Mike Tyson's boxing career. They didn't seem to care about the 3 women that were assaulted that night.
If Mike is treated for the disease of manic depression, what do you think it will do to his boxing?
I think that if he's actually adjudicated or it's finally decided that he is a manic depressive and he is put on lithium, as far as I'm concerned, he'll never box again. I won't permit him to.
While everyone was so fixated on Mike and his career and the boxing world, no one really saw the truth of what his wife, Robin Givens, was going through. We now know about the rape that she had suffered that night, but back then, Robin never shared that with the world. She kept it to herself for years, probably because it felt like no one would care and no one would believe her. At this point, after the Moscow incident, Mike desperately needed a chance to clean up his image, including all of the rumours about his marriage because, well, he's a cheaty McCheat pants, isn't he? So, he and Robin agreed to do a TV interview with Barbra Walters, who is kind of like a Oprah figure, a Wendy Williams, a Lorraine, love her. Love how she never hosts that damn show. Barbra Walters had promised the two of them a safe space to be honest about everything, and she encouraged them that sharing their story could really help other people that are going through something similar. And Robin almost felt like it was her duty to help other women out there. So she took this opportunity and she was so open and honest and brave to say everything that she was going through with Mike behind closed doors. Not completely everything. She didn't mention the rape, but the abuse for sure. She laid it all out on the table, thinking that surely if she spoke her truth, then someone out there would finally understand. Someone would hear her, someone would help her, or other victims could learn from her. Perhaps Mike would even get the help he needs to be a better man, to be more mentally stable. If the world finds out how bad he is abusing his wife, maybe a doctor will step in. So they go and they do this interview that Robin is hoping will be an overall positive experience for everyone involved. But instead, that interview became the thing that destroyed everything and turned Robin Givens into one of the most hated women in America for a very long time. And Robin did not hold back with her wording in this interview. We have some direct quotes. She said that her marriage to Mike was like hell on earth. It was pure torture. Barbra asked Robin if Mike would hit her behind closed doors, and she said yes. She said he pushes, he swings. She admitted, there are times I thought I could handle it, and just recently I've become afraid. I mean, very, very much afraid. And we know exactly why she said that, because it had been less than a week since that horrific incident in Moscow where she was raped and she thought that Mike was going to kill himself. And you know what the eeriest thing about this whole Barbra Walters interview is? It's nothing to do with Robin, actually. It's Mike. Because he was sat next to her the whole entire time. He was just kind of looming over her, watching her with such a straight face. He doesn't react to anything she's saying. She is literally saying in a TV interview about how he beats her behind the scenes, and he doesn't say a word. He doesn't react at all. He never interrupted her. He never tried to defend himself. Just absolutely nothing. It was like they got a Mike Tyson wax figure from Madame Tussauds and sat him next to Robin. Mike claimed a little bit later on that the reason for his silence because he was just so stunned in the moment with what Robin was saying, with all these lies that she was spouting out to the world. He just couldn't believe his ears. He was shocked into silence. He says he doesn't understand why Robin would tell these lies to the world. He even said, if I'd acted crazy and started smashing her in front of the cameras, that's what she would have wanted. So hold on, let me get this straight. He insists that Robin Givens is lying in this interview, that he doesn't hit her behind closed doors. She's making this shit up. But then, when he describes what he would have done to her, like it's something that he's done behind closed doors before, just started smashing her, like it's something that she would expect from him. I feel like that in itself is some kind of stupid, twisted admission that he does this shit on the regular. Mike believes that it was all part of Robin's twisted plan to frame him, was to get him really mad on TV and then prove the abuse that she's been going through behind closed doors. There's no framing about it really, is there? It's literally just showing what he does behind closed doors, but to the world. And you know what? Maybe she did want people to see the real Mike, the one who abused her. If he had lost control on camera, then maybe the world would finally start to take Robin Givens seriously. Robin very bravely shared her truth with the world, while sitting beside the man who had beat her, raped her, and emotionally abused her for months. But no one was listening. When the Barbra Walters interview aired, the public reaction was nothing like what Robin had hoped. It's actually quite unbelievable to think about in today's lens. Robin was cast as the villain of this twisted love story. She was the gold-digging, fame-hungry siren who had manipulated a very vulnerable man like Mike Tyson. They said that she had drugged him and humiliated him on national television. Meanwhile, all she had done was sit there and talk about the abuse that she had suffered at his hands. She didn't make anything up. In 2017, the hashtag MeToo movement went viral and finally woke the world up to this massive problem of sexual violence, especially in the entertainment industry. The power of hashtag MeToo wasn't in just one person's story, it was in the thousands of voices all speaking up together, calling out an entire system of abuse and harassment. But in 1988, when Robin Givens very bravely spoke up on Barbra Walters' show, she was completely alone. She didn't have the MeToo movement to back her up. And now it seemed like the whole entire world had turned on her. For what? For being a victim. It's so devastating. In her book, Robin talks about this moment that she was walking down the street in New York City after the interview had aired, and she walks past this woman who was around her age when she first met Mike, and this woman yelled at her, "He should have kicked your ass. He should have killed you." Could you imagine having that yelled at you in the street after you have survived some of the worst abuse, some of the worst violation by a man, and then someone comes along, another woman of all people, someone comes up to you and says, that abuse should have killed you? How vile. And I don't want to put 100% of the blame for that incident on that young woman that yelled it, because the whole entire world had that same sentiment towards Robin Givens at that time, and it was infiltrating the minds of other young women. Back then, people didn't want to believe women, especially when their abuser was someone so famous and loved as Mike Tyson. He was a hero, he was adored by millions, and Robin spoke out in an era that just wasn't ready to listen. And honestly, even today, I want to believe that we would be ready to hear her story, but I'm not sure everyone would. Mike Tyson is still so loved by so many people. I mean, him fighting Jake Paul is going to open him up to a whole younger audience, a whole new generation of young men that are going to continue to adore him and celebrate him. So if Robin was to come forward with her story today, would people really listen? I guess that's why I'm telling her story now, is because I want to believe that we would. Back then, Robin didn't have a collective outcry or social media to support her. She didn't have #MeToo. She was left isolated in her pain, and her truth deserves to be heard. Mike apparently once told her, "I have the power to make the truth what I want it to be." And after the Barbra Walters interview, that's exactly what he did. It terrified Robin just how much the media, the press, the whole entire world vilified her, because it only confirmed how much power Mike had. She was completely trapped by the story that he had spun, and there was nothing that she could do to change it, to change how the world sees her, to change how the world was treating her now. A month after the Barbra Walters interview, Robin filed for divorce against Mike, citing spousal abuse, and she actually got a restraining order against him. They were only married for 8 months, and so in total, they were together for less than 2 years. Around the same time that Robin had filed for a divorce, Mike also filed for an annulment, claiming that Robin's pregnancy and her miscarriage were all part of a scheme to trap him into marriage with her. He was desperately trying to prove that this pregnancy and the miscarriage were fake. He was telling people that she never even gained a single pound while she was supposedly pregnant. But I think he was forgetting that she had had multiple doctor's appointments, and the doctor himself was the one that delivered the news of the miscarriage. There were medical records that she had been pregnant and had miscarried. But still, that didn't stop Mike Tyson from twisting this story and painting Robin as this gold-digging, manipulative witch of a woman who took advantage of him. But Robin Givens was done letting Mike Tyson control their story, her story. And so she sued him in a $125 million defamation lawsuit. But unfortunately, as they did last time, the media sided with Mike. Their divorce was finalized on Valentine's Day of 1989, and Robin has always denied receiving a $10 million settlement from the divorce, but I think Mike is insistent that she did. After this divorce, Mike Tyson's life just spiraled out of control. There were lawsuits, there were car accidents, there were domestic fights. But it was in the early hours of the morning of July 19th, 1991, when Mike did something truly horrific. Mike was in Indianapolis for the Miss Black America pageant, and there he met a young 18-year-old girl named Desiree Washington. She was bubbly, she was fun, she was sweet, she was ambitious, and she dreamed of becoming the first black female president. But Mike Tyson would forcefully rip all of that away from Desiree. Later that evening, after the Miss Black America rehearsals, Mike invited Desiree to come out with him. And of course, she was excited. I mean, she has just been invited out by the biggest boxer in the whole entire world. Her family loved Mike Tyson. In fact, the whole country did. So she was just so flattered and so excited to be given this opportunity to hang out with Mike Tyson. She thought that this was like a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity that she could go back home and tell everyone about, and they would be so jealous. So she went, thinking that this was an innocent opportunity not to be missed. But when Mike coaxed her up to his hotel room to talk a little bit, things started to feel off. Her excitement slowly turned into unease, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, and she soon realized that things weren't as harmless as she thought. That night, after coaxing her up into his hotel room, Mike Tyson raped Desiree Washington. The very next morning, she got up and took herself to the emergency room, where she told them that she had been raped. I'm not going to go into the whole case and trial of Desiree, but the way that the public treated her was pretty much the same as the way that they treated Robin. Instead of seeing a brave young woman that had come forward about an abuser, they labeled her a gold digger, a villain.
Another beauty pageant contestant quoted you as saying, "He's got a lot of money and he's dumb. You saw what Robin Givens got out of him."
That's another thing that I never said.
You're starting to see a pattern, right? These two women have both come forward about Mike Tyson's abuse, and the two of them have been labelled as gold diggers, as attention whores. They were accused of humiliating this man. They were painted as villains, not victims. Mike has always denied what happened with Desiree Washington, the way that he denies a lot of things with Robin. He said, "I was falsely accused of raping that wretched swine of a woman, Desiree Washington." How disgusting. But in the end, Mike was convicted of raping Desiree Washington on February 10th, 1992, and he only served 3 years in prison. The fact that he was convicted tells you everything you need to know. The fact that she went to the emergency room, there was probably evidence still on her. And the amount of rape cases that can never get a conviction because of insufficient evidence, like, This should be screaming volumes right now. It's been over 30 years since the night that Mike did that to Desiree Washington, and sadly, Desiree wasn't the first or the last woman to come forward. Since then, Robin released her book where she very bravely wrote about that night in Moscow. That was the first time she'd ever told the world that Mike had raped her. And in 2023, another young woman came forward accusing Mike of raping her in the early 1990s when they met at a nightclub in New York. She claims that he had assaulted her in his limousine, and ever since that day, she has endured physical, psychological, and emotional injury. It's just heartbreaking to think how many more women could be out there just carrying the weight of their trauma in silence, fearful of the backlash that always seems to be there to protect powerful men. And it's just sickening to think that there could be so many women that could come forward, but they're scared out of it because they've seen how the media have treated Robin and Desiree. Who would want to put themselves directly in the firing line after seeing what it has done to two other women? The day he was accused of raping Desiree Washington, Mike Tyson said that was the worst day of his life. But in the same breath, he admitted, "I would have never done something to that extent, and whatever I did, I may have took advantage of women before, but I never took advantage of her." As you guys know, we always want to shout out charities and amazing organisations in these videos, and today I want to bring your attention to an amazing organisation called Safe Lives. They are dedicated to ending domestic abuse for everyone for good. It's shocking that over 2 million people in the UK experience domestic abuse every year. 2 million. And no one should ever have to live in fear. You can donate to Safe Lives on their website, you can donate by text, or even in the memory of a loved one, which is a super special and meaningful way to honour someone, I think. And if you're one of those people that's like training for a marathon this year, or if you're doing something wild like swim in the channel or abseiling off a building or something, please consider choosing Safe Lives for your fundraising. It's an incredible way to spread awareness about such an important charity, and it makes a real difference. The link to their website will be in the description of this episode, and like always, we will have a direct link to our link tree below where you can find domestic abuse helplines and other resources. Over 3 decades ago, no one was ready to listen or to help Robin Givens, who so bravely spoke out about the abuse that she was suffering at the hands of the heavyweight boxing champion of the world. Today, Robin might be a famous and successful actress, but the abuse she endured, both from Mike and from the relentless public attacks, have left lasting scars. She has had to carry all of that trauma for years. And here we are, all these years later, and Mike Tyson is still celebrated. Tonight, he's even back in the ring fighting YouTuber Jake Paul. Millions and millions of people are cheering him on. He is still worshipped by what feels like every teenage boy and his dad. It's like none of Mike Tyson's past, none of his violence against women ever happened. In fact, his fans have been more outraged at Mike Tyson for biting off an opponent's ear in the ring than they were by the fact that he beat and raped his wife. Robin's story really makes you think. If she came forward today, would things have been different? Would we actually listen to her? would Mike Tyson be in the position he is right now? At the end of the day, what's the point in #MeToo if we can't stand up for women like Robin just because the man that abused her is still hailed as a hero and loved by so many people? If we're serious about change, then we need to start listening. Really listening to women like Robin, no matter who the abuser is, no matter if you like him. Mike Tyson may have landed his best punch on his wife, but Robin Givens will always be the stronger fighter. And that is all we have for this case. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you again to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. Remember, the first 500 people to click the link down below in the description will get a 1-month free trial, and trust me, you will love it. There are so many classes that you could complete in a month, so teach yourself a new skill, teach yourself a new hobby, girl. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a thumbs up, leave a comment down below, share it. If you engage with this video somehow, it tells YouTube that you like my channel, so they'll push it out further. So if you're looking for a free way to help support me and my team and the work that we do, then a like, a comment, it goes a long way, and we read the comments. We love reading the comments. If you want to watch another video of mine, there's one on screen right now, or you should subscribe to my channel. Click the circle with my face in, and you should put the notifications on so you never miss when we post. But thank you so much for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!